Somewhere tonight, there is a woman lying awake, scrolling through a phone full of people, and still, without meaning to, she is thinking about one man. He was not the richest. He was not the most photogenic. He probably never sent a paragraph explaining how he felt, and yet he is the one she cannot fully delete from her memory, the one every future partner gets quietly, unfairly compared to. This is not an accident, and it is not magic. It is the result of something almost nobody talks about because it does not sell as easily as tricks, lines, or games. It is the result of a kind of internal command that most men never build in their entire lives. What if the reason she still thinks about him has nothing to do with what he gave her and everything to do with what he never begged her for? That question changes everything about how you understand attraction, because most men are taught to chase, to prove, to perform, and to escalate, while almost nobody teaches them how to simply remain. Remaining sounds passive, but it is the opposite. Remaining, in the way we are going to describe it, is one of the hardest disciplines a man can build, and it is the exact quality that separates the forgettable from the unforgettable. There is a strange, uncomfortable truth sitting underneath almost every failed connection, every situationship that fizzled, every promising start that quietly died. The truth is this: most men are taught to chase, to prove, to perform, and to escalate, while almost nobody teaches them how to simply remain. Remaining sounds passive, but it is the opposite. Remaining, in the way we are going to describe it, is one of the hardest disciplines a man can build, and it is the exact quality that separates the forgettable from the unforgettable. Let us start with the first piece, because it is the foundation everything else rests on, and without it, nothing else in this video will work for you. It is emotional steadiness, or what some call the unshaken center. Picture two men in the exact same argument with a partner. The first one raises his voice the moment he feels cornered. He defends himself loudly, or worse, he goes cold and punishes with silence, hoping she will chase his approval back. The second man listens. He does not flinch when the tone gets sharp. He does not need the conversation to end a certain way to feel secure in himself. He responds slowly, deliberately, and when there is nothing productive left to say, he simply stops talking instead of filling the air with noise just to feel in control. Which of these two men do you think she remembers years later with a strange kind of respect, even if things did not work out between them? It is never the one who reacted. It is always the one who stayed centered while everything around him tried to knock him off balance. This is not about suppressing emotion, and it is not about becoming a robot who feels nothing. It is about refusing to let your internal state be hijacked by someone else's mood, someone else's test, or someone else's bad day. A man who can be disappointed without collapsing, frustrated without exploding, and hurt without demanding an apology to feel okay again becomes something rare. He becomes a kind of emotional shelter, and people, whether they admit it or not, are drawn to shelter the way travelers are drawn to warm light on a cold night. Now, here is where it gets slightly uncomfortable, so pay close attention because this next part might describe you more than you would like to admit. Most men believe they are emotionally steady simply because they do not scream or throw things, but steadiness is not the absence of visible anger, it is the absence of internal dependency. Ask yourself honestly, does your sense of worth quietly rise and fall depending on how someone treats you that day? Do you feel a small flicker of anxiety when a message goes unanswered for a few hours? If so, you are not yet the man who commands quiet respect. You are still the man auditioning for approval, and on some level, people can always feel the difference even when they cannot explain why. This leads us directly into the second piece, and this one is going to challenge almost everything you have been taught about how to keep someone interested. It is the discipline of detachment from outcome, or in simpler terms, loving without needing. This sounds like a contradiction at first. How can you care about someone while also not needing the relationship to survive? But this is exactly the paradox that creates magnetism instead of repulsion. Neediness in every form, whether it is over texting, over explaining, over apologizing, or constantly seeking reassurance, sends a signal even if nobody says it out loud. That signal is this: my stability depends on you staying, and nothing extinguishes attraction faster than someone whose entire emotional world rests on your decision to remain in it. Think about two very different men once more. The first one texts constantly, gets anxious when plans change, and quietly resents any sign of independence from his partner because it threatens the illusion of control he is desperately holding on to. The second man has a full, demanding, meaningful life of his own. He wants her there. He enjoys her presence deeply, but if she needed to walk away tomorrow, his world would not collapse into rubble. He would grieve because he is human, but he would not fall apart because his identity was never built on top of her presence in the first place. Here is the part that stings a little, so brace yourself. If your happiness depends entirely on someone else choosing you every single day, you have unknowingly handed them all the power in the relationship, and worse, you have taught your own nervous system that you are only safe when someone else approves of you. That is not love. That is outsourced self-worth. And deep down, people can sense it the same way you can sense when a smile is fake, even if you cannot point to exactly why. The reason so many men feel invisible, replaceable, or easily forgotten is not because they lack looks, money, or charm. It is because they never built an identity that could stand entirely on its own without anyone's applause. And if that sentence just made your chest tighten a little, good. That means we are getting somewhere real. Let us move into the third piece, which is purpose. And I want you to understand, this is not a throwaway motivational phrase. It is a psychological mechanism with real, observable consequences. A man without a purpose beyond his relationships becomes, whether he intends to or not, a kind of emotional tenant living inside someone else's life. His days orbit around her schedule, her mood, her attention. A man with a genuine purpose, a mission that exists independently of anyone's validation, brings something into the relationship instead of only extracting from it. He is not there to fill an emptiness. He is there because he chose to share a life that was already meaningful before she arrived in it. There is a subtle but important distinction here between having a job and having a purpose. A job pays bills. A purpose organizes your identity. You can have both, or you can have neither. But the man who becomes unforgettable is almost always the one who is building something, whether that is a craft, a skill, a body of work, a discipline he refines year after year, something that exists regardless of whether anyone is watching or approving. This is the quiet engine behind real confidence, not the performative kind you see people fake online, but the kind that does not need an audience to remain intact. Now here is a question I want you to sit with uncomfortably for a second. If your relationship ended tomorrow, would your life still have direction, or would you feel like a ship without a rudder, drifting until the next person came along to give you a destination? Be honest with yourself, because nobody else is grading this answer but you. If the honest answer scares you a little, that fear is actually useful information, not something to run from. Let us move into the fourth piece now, which is presence, specifically the rare skill of listening in a way that almost nobody practices anymore. We live in an environment engineered for distraction, where most conversations are really just two people waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. The man who listens differently, who actually absorbs what someone is saying instead of formulating his next sentence while they are still speaking, creates an experience that feels almost foreign in a world starved of real attention. Imagine someone describing a hard day, a frustration, a fear. The average response jumps immediately to solving it, fixing it, or worse, redirecting the conversation back to a similar story about themselves. But real presence does something different. It sits with the discomfort. It resists the urge to fill silence with advice nobody asked for. It simply receives what is being shared without judgment, without an agenda, without needing to perform helpfulness. This kind of attention is rare enough that people remember exactly how it felt, sometimes for years, long after they have forgotten the specific words that were said. There is a reason for this, rooted in basic human wiring. Being deeply heard activates something primal, a sense of safety that most people rarely experience in their daily interactions. When you offer that kind of presence consistently, you are not just being polite, you are creating a memory that attaches itself to you specifically, because very few people in this person's life have ever made them feel that seen. Now let us talk about something a little heavier, something that quietly determines whether a man ever becomes the version of himself capable of all of this. It is the way he handles rejection, and this is where most men completely fall apart without realizing it. Rejection is treated, almost universally, as proof of inadequacy. Someone says no, someone pulls away, someone chooses somebody else, and instantly the mind spirals into a story about not being enough. But here is the uncomfortable reframe that changes everything once you actually internalize it. Rejection is not a verdict on your worth. It is simply information about compatibility, timing, or readiness. Nothing more, nothing less. The man who can absorb a no without collapsing into self-doubt, who can watch someone walk away without chasing, pleading, or spiraling into resentment, sends an unmistakable signal even in the moment of loss. That signal says, "My value does not evaporate just because you did not choose it." And ironically, this is often exactly what makes people reconsider, not because he manipulated the situation, but because his stability in the face of loss revealed a kind of strength that neediness could never fake. Ask yourself something honestly right now, and do not rush the answer. After the last time someone rejected you or pulled away, how many days did it take before your sense of self-worth returned to normal? An hour? A day? A month? There is no shame in whatever number came to mind, but there is important information in it, because that gap, that recovery time, is a direct measurement of how much of your identity is currently sitting outside of your own hands and inside someone else's opinion of you. If any part of this is making you slightly uneasy, that is not a bad sign. That is your own psychology recognizing a pattern it has been avoiding for a long time. Now, let us look at the sixth piece, which is restrained strength, or what could be called power without domination. There is a very specific kind of man who is physically capable, financially capable, or socially capable of overpowering almost any room he walks into, and yet chooses, consistently, to lead with gentleness instead of force. This restraint is not weakness in disguise. It is, paradoxically, one of the clearest signals of real strength that exists, because only a person who is fully secure in their capability can afford to soften it voluntarily. Contrast this with a man who constantly needs to prove his dominance, who raises his voice to be heard, who name-drops accomplishments to feel validated, who cannot let a disagreement go without needing to win it publicly. This behavior does not signal strength. It signals fragility wearing strength as a costume. True strength does not need an audience to confirm it exists. The man who can walk away from a pointless argument without needing the last word, who can be corrected without his ego shattering, who can treat someone with less power than him with the same respect he shows someone above him, becomes a kind of anomaly in a culture obsessed with proving worth loudly. This restraint creates a very specific emotional residue in the people around him. They remember feeling safe, not intimidated, not managed, not performed for, just genuinely safe. And safety, in a world this chaotic, is quietly one of the most attractive qualities a person can offer another human being, even though almost nobody markets it that way. Now, here comes the seventh piece, and this one plays directly into something most people are afraid to admit about themselves. It is the role of mystery, but not the manipulative kind of mystery built on deliberately withholding information to manufacture insecurity in someone else. That version is a cheap trick, and eventually it curdles into distrust. The mystery we are talking about here is depth, the simple, honest reality that a person with a rich inner world, private thoughts, ongoing personal evolution, and layers that unfold slowly over time is inherently more compelling than someone who reveals absolutely everything in the first conversation. Think about why certain people remain endlessly interesting even after years of knowing them, while others become entirely predictable within the first few weeks. It is rarely because the interesting person is hiding secrets. It is because they are still growing, still working on something, still becoming a slightly different version of themselves every few months, which means there is always something new to discover. Not because it was strategically hidden, but because it genuinely did not exist yet. This is the difference between manufactured mystery and authentic depth, and I want to be very clear about this distinction, because confusing the two ruins more potential connections than almost anything else on this list. Manufactured mystery is a performance, and performances eventually collapse under their own weight. Authentic depth is simply the natural result of a person who never stopped developing, and it cannot be faked for very long because eventually someone gets close enough to see whether there is real substance underneath or just a carefully maintained illusion. There is something else worth understanding here because it explains why two men can say the exact same words and produce completely different reactions in a room. It is the silent language running underneath everything you say, the tone of your voice, the pace of your speech, the way your body occupies space, and whether your eyes hold steady or dart away the moment something feels tense. Most people believe communication is mainly about the words chosen, but the truth is far less comfortable than that. The words are almost the smallest part of the equation. A sentence delivered in a rushed, apologetic tone, with shoulders slightly curled inward and eyes searching for approval, will land completely differently than the exact same sentence delivered slowly, with a steady voice and a relaxed, grounded posture. This is not about faking confidence through some checklist of tricks, standing a certain way, forcing eye contact until it becomes uncomfortable, deepening your voice artificially. All of that collapses the moment real pressure shows up, because it was never coming from anywhere real. What actually changes someone's presence in a room is a body that has genuinely stopped bracing for judgment. Watch closely, and you will notice it in people who are truly at ease. Their movements are unhurried, not because they are trying to appear calm, but because there is no internal emergency running in the background demanding urgency. Their voice does not rise in pitch when challenged, not because they are suppressing a reaction, but because there is nothing threatening enough underneath to trigger one in the first place. Now let us talk about a trap that catches an enormous number of men who genuinely mean well, and it is worth naming clearly because it hides inside behavior that looks, on the surface, like effort and care. It is the trap of trying too hard, the exhausting cycle of over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-scheduling, and constantly seeking small signals of reassurance that everything is fine. This pattern usually comes from a good place, a genuine desire to be considerate, to avoid conflict, to make sure the other person feels prioritized. But there is a hidden cost buried inside all that effort, because excessive reassurance seeking quietly communicates the opposite of what it intends. Instead of saying, "I care about you," it often ends up saying, "I am not sure of my own footing here, and I need you to keep confirming it for me." Picture a man who apologizes reflexively for things that require no apology, who checks in constantly to make sure everything is okay, who rereads his own messages 5 times before sending them out of fear they might be misread. On the surface, this looks like emotional intelligence, and in small doses it can be, but taken to its extreme, it becomes a subtle form of self-erasure where a person shrinks themselves down, sanding off every rough edge, every honest opinion, every moment of friction, purely to avoid the discomfort of potential disapproval. And ironically, the more a person disappears in this way, the less there is left of them to actually be drawn toward. The final piece is kindness that costs something, and this might be the quietest but most enduring quality on this entire list. Kindness that requires nothing, that flows only when it is convenient, easy, or beneficial to your own image, is not particularly rare and does not leave much of a lasting impression. But kindness offered when there is genuinely nothing to gain, when nobody is watching, when it would have been easier to stay silent or walk away, this is the kind of kindness that people remember for the rest of their lives. Think of the moments that actually stay with people. It is rarely the grand gestures, the expensive gifts, or the dramatic declarations. It is the small, unglamorous acts of decency offered without an audience, a genuine word of encouragement during someone's lowest moment, patience extended during someone's worst day, support given even when it meant stepping quietly into the background instead of taking credit. This kind of kindness is a choice, not a personality trait people are simply born with. And every time it is chosen deliberately, it becomes a small, permanent deposit in someone's memory of you. There is a specific kind of kindness that matters even more than the rest, and it is the hardest to offer because it goes against every instinct of self-protection. It is the kindness of telling someone an inconvenient truth because it serves them, not because it serves you. Most people, if they are honest, would rather be comfortable than correct. They will soften an observation until it loses all its usefulness or stay silent entirely rather than risk a moment of tension. But there is a rarer kind of person who can deliver a hard truth with enough warmth that it lands as care instead of criticism. Someone who says the uncomfortable thing precisely because they respect the other person enough not to manage them with silence. Let us bring everything together now, because there is a common thread running underneath every single piece we discussed today. And once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it again. Emotional steadiness, detachment from outcome, purpose, deep presence, resilience through rejection, restrained strength, authentic depth, and unglamorous kindness. None of these are techniques you perform on another person. Every single one of them is an internal renovation. Something you build inside yourself first, long before it ever becomes visible to anyone else. This is the part that most content in this space gets completely backwards. It frames all of this as a strategy for extracting a reaction out of someone else, a way to manipulate attention, manufacture longing, or trigger a psychological response in another human being, like they are a machine with predictable buttons. But everything we just walked through only works because it is real. The moment you try to perform emotional steadiness while secretly panicking underneath, or fake detachment while quietly refreshing your phone every 10 minutes, the illusion collapses because people, especially the ones who matter most, can feel the difference between a performance and a person. The uncomfortable truth, the one most men spend years avoiding, is that becoming unforgettable to someone else was never actually the real goal. It was always a byproduct of something much harder and much more valuable, becoming someone who does not need anyone else's approval to feel whole. The moment you stop chasing that external validation and start building an internal foundation strong enough to stand completely on its own, something strange happens. People start remembering you, not because you tried to be unforgettable, but because you finally stopped trying. And what was left standing underneath all that effort was someone real. So, here is the question I want to leave you with tonight, and I want you to actually think about it instead of letting it pass by like background noise. Which version of yourself is showing up in your relationships right now? The one still quietly performing for approval, or the one who has genuinely stopped needing it? You do not have to answer that out loud to anyone, but you already know, and that knowledge is exactly where real change begins. There is one last thing worth understanding before you go, and it might be the most important idea in this entire video. So, do not let it slip past you just because we are near the end. None of what we covered today happens on a timeline you can rush. There is no seminar, no single breakthrough conversation, no overnight transformation that installs emotional steadiness, detachment, purpose, presence, resilience, restraint, depth, and unglamorous kindness all at once. Anyone promising you an instant version of this is selling something that does not exist. What actually exists is slower, quieter, and far less exciting to market. A daily practice of noticing your own patterns and choosing, imperfectly, again and again, to respond from steadiness instead of anxiety, from purpose instead of neediness, from presence instead of performance. This means there will be days you fail. You will catch yourself checking a phone too often, reacting too quickly, needing reassurance you swore you had outgrown. This is not evidence that the work does not apply to you. It is simply evidence that you are human, and that old patterns rarely leave quietly on the first attempt. What matters is not perfection, it is direction. A man moving slowly towards steadiness, even with frequent stumbles, is worlds apart from a man who never noticed the pattern at all and continues repeating it on autopilot for another 10 years without ever questioning it. If this reached something real in you today, do not let it end here. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and come back because the next part of this journey goes even deeper into rebuilding the internal foundation we only introduced today. The goal was never to become irresistible to someone else. The goal was always to become someone you no longer have to perform to be.